People ask me, how did I first get into coffee? And I can think back when I was really young that I used to drink only decaf instant coffee. I was pretty high strung and didn't think I could drink regular coffee, so I drank decaf. Didn't know at the time that the coffee that I was drinking that I thought I couldn't drink was Robusta, but that realization would come decades later. And it wasn't until early 2000s, around 2004, that I first really started to get into coffee. First really started liking drinking coffee differently, not instant, not Maxwell House, not canned coffee, but what is referred to today as specialty coffee. And I wanted to make good coffee at home. And so I started to upgrade my equipment because I thought it was all about the kind of espresso making, brewing, grinding equipment that I had that would make me the best coffee. And I acquired a La Pavoni Italian-made espresso machine, really beautiful. It was brass and wood. It was a single group, and we pressed it down the espresso shot. And I had bought it, I remember, online. And I got a burr grinder, a B-U-R-R, as opposed to a blade grinder. And I was buying coffee in the stores, Costco mainly. So I was shopping at Costco at the time and buying things as cheap as I could get it, and didn't know that it made a difference whether I was buying coffee that was freshly roasted, or even I had some kind of roast date on it, or coffee that was prepackaged in vacuum sealed bags and was on the store shelves like Costco. And I had choices at Costco. I could get Green Mountain coffee, I could get Starbucks coffee, I could buy a bunch of other brands, but pretty much they were all the same. And they came in large 2.5 pound vacuum sealed bags, and I didn't really notice that there was much difference between the two. And my focus was on technique, was on being a barista and trying to get the best extraction out of this inferior coffee. So I practiced my technique, and this went on for a couple years. I was practicing until I thought my technique was pretty good. And I visited a cousin that I had in Israel who used to make cakes and coffee and espresso. And he prided himself on making the best cakes and the best espresso. And his espressos actually were pretty good. Don't know where his coffee came from, but he also had an espresso machine. He had perfected his barista technique. And he came to the US. I was living in Southern Oregon at the time. And I said, okay, it's going to be my turn, and I'm going to make a better coffee than you could make. So we had this little competition. And he came, and I was perfecting my technique, trying to get it just right, still buying the same store-bought coffee. And then when he came, I made him the best coffee I could. I made him the best extraction that I could, that I had practiced to at the time, and waiting for his reaction. And it was, he wasn't impressed, and it just really threw me for a loop. I was really depressed that, what was he not impressed about? This was the best technique, I got the best extraction, this is as good as this coffee was going to be that I had just made him. And he was very unimpressed. So I didn't know what to do. I kind of gave up at that point. Went back to the drawing board and not realizing that there was a big part of this equation missing, and that was, where was the coffee coming from? What kind of coffee was I using? And weeks later, I was at a closing of a commercial property that I owned, and I had some new tenants, and we signed a lease, a contract, and at the sitting down of the closing, they brought me a gift. And it was a Glad baggie, plastic baggie, filled with coffee. And they said they roasted it at home in their hot air popcorn popper. I didn't really know what they were talking about at the time. And they presented it to me, and I thought, okay, yeah, I'll give it a try. And not knowing where the coffee was from, what they did to it, whatever. Closing happened, I brought it home, that was in the afternoon. The next morning, I found I was out of coffee. I didn't have any more coffee beans. But I did have this bag that these people had given me. And I decided, I might as well try it. Tried everything else. So I remember I ground it pulled the extraction, seemed to be the same. When I took a sip, I couldn't believe it. It was something I never, ever experienced before. It was something that I felt, this was what I was looking for. It was a taste, it was a feeling, it was something alive in it that I had never experienced with any coffee in my life before. And I remember I was just got weak in the knees. I had to sit down. And I had this feeling that I had discovered something. Like I had seen this for the first time. No other human had experienced this experience. Kind of felt like what the discoverer of Tutankhamun's tomb would have felt like when he uncovered all this treasure inside. That he was seeing this like for the very first time. And I remember had this feeling that I just found this pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. I didn't know why. I didn't know what that feeling meant. I just had this incredible, overwhelming sense that this moment was something really special that was changing my life in that moment forever. It was very powerful. And I took that experience after that, and I asked them about roasting it. Said they're hot air popcorn popper. I started to do some research, and I found that there was a small group of people who were roasting their own coffee at home. They got green beans from a certain place, and then they had all these different techniques to roast it. And I started looking around my house to see how could I roast my own coffee. And I remember at the time I had just started eating raw food, and we had a big 4-burner barbecue grill that was sitting outside. It wasn't being used now. It certainly wasn't grilling any steaks or meat on it. And I discovered that I could buy a 1-pound drum, a canister, to put green coffee in, and I can attach it to a rotisserie, a chicken rotisserie skewer, which would turn that drum over my big 4-burner barbecue grill, and I could roast coffee that way. So I ordered these. It was very, very inexpensive. Put it all together, and I started roasting coffee that way on my barbecue grill. And it was very uneven. I wasn't getting great results as far as the color and the consistency of the roast. However, since it was just roasted, when I was trying it the next morning, it was better than anything I'd ever had because it was freshly roasted. And it really showed me how important that factor is. I was missing it the whole time. And so I just went head on into the whole idea of roasting at home, of making it better. I got a bigger motor that would turn that drum 60 revolutions a minute, so then I really started to get a nice consistent roast. Then I went from a 1-pound drum to a 5-pound drum, and now I was roasting 5 pounds at a shot. And I was sharing this coffee with my friends, and they couldn't believe it. They, like me, had never experienced coffee like that. And it really showed me something. It really showed me that this was something that was not available, but when people tried it, it altered their experience forever. They wanted to have this kind of coffee after that. They wouldn't go back to what they were buying before. So I started a small business, and I started to roast my coffee and deliver it to my friends. And I also started making a cold pressed coffee, cold brewed coffee, with whatever coffee that I didn't sell, that wasn't consumed within a day or two. I would cold brew it, because what I found with a cold brew is that when you make it, it stays fresh in the refrigerator for 3 weeks. So I was bottling it. I got these ball canning jars, and I'm bottling my cold brew. And now I have a small business going. I'm selling my fresh roasted coffee. I'm bottling my cold brew. And not really making money, but just like a hobby. And I have a friend who is a very talented inventor kind of guy. And he has this big garage, it's like a workshop. And he's really good at machinery, equipment, and fixing car engines, that kind of thing. And I shared with him my coffee. He was a coffee lover, and he said, I gotta see what you're doing, because this is amazing coffee. And he came over, and he took one look at my big barbecue grill with my drum and my motor on it, and he said, man, you are being way too inefficient. Look at how much propane you're using. I think that you could have something that we can make something together, and you could be a lot more efficient. And so we went into his garage, his warehouse, and I got a couple pieces of equipment that would bend steel. We got some stainless steel. We created our own drum. We created our own stainless steel kind of mini barbecue, like I was doing with my outdoor barbecue, but we made it much smaller, and it was much more efficient. And I took this roaster and I started to roast on my own. I put it on a van. I got this big white full-size Chevy van, gutted the inside, put some shelving on it, and I took my roaster, which I could carry by myself, put it on the van, got a deep cell battery, and what I would do is pull over the side of the road. This is in a very rural place. Plug in my roaster into my deep cell battery, get my green beans, put them in, and start roasting on the side of the road. And people would smell it. What are you doing? I'm roasting coffee. You want to buy some? And I started kind of a very small business that way. But I got practice as a coffee roaster, and I realized how easy it was to roast, and I also realized how important it was to have that part of the process in my own control, in my own hands, and not to buy store-bought coffee. And I started experimenting, buying green coffee from all around the world. And I was doing this for a couple years, and then came to Bali after not having been to Bali in 2 years. My wife and I had a business, and we were coming to Bali 3-4 times every year. Whenever we'd come to Bali, I'd stop drinking coffee, because the coffee here was really not drinkable. I would switch to tea. For a month, sometimes a month at a time, I would go without coffee. And I knew they grew it here, but it was something in their process that made the Bali coffee, to me, undrinkable. So what I did was, I have a friend who's a coffee farmer, and went up to Kintamani, and he sold me a couple pounds of green coffee, and I said, you know, I'm going to take this home and try it myself and roast it, because I don't know what you're doing with the process here, but you grow coffee here. It must be pretty good. So I took the 100% Arabica green coffee that I acquired here in Kintamani, took it home, roasted it myself, and it was as good as anything else I was importing. It wasn't better. It wasn't much better than